Dominic Thorne. I have seen all of the first 3 episodes of Ironheart. How did this even come about?
It wasn't supposed to matter. That's what they told themselves. In meetings, in interviews, in boardroom slide decks. Robert Downey Jr.'s Tony Stark was dead, retired, a martyr, a memory. He had served his narrative purpose. He'd passed the torch. He'd been given the perfect ending. What came next didn't need him, until it did. Ironheart premiered without much noise. No theatrical run, no red carpet. Just another Disney Plus release in a long line of streaming side quests. A 6-episode drop into the ever-expanding swamp of Phase 5. Riri Williams, played by Dominic Thorne, had already been introduced in Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, and fans liked her, in theory. A genius. Young, confident. She had Stark's brains, but none of his legacy. That was the point. The first season came and went. Reviews were polite, not glowing, not hostile. The word that kept showing up in headlines was functional. Thorne was good. The tech looked clean. The action was mid-budget but decent. But something was missing. Not just excitement, weight. The show floated. It never landed. Behind the scenes, the mood wasn't better. Showrunners had struggled to work around budget cuts imposed halfway through production. Scenes were rewritten on the fly. A planned cameo by a holographic Stark AI was filmed and cut 3 weeks later after Marvel's legal team intervened. Merchandise projections underperformed. Viewer engagement dropped off by episode 3. Still, internally, Marvel greenlit season 2, quietly, without fanfare. Scripts were already in development. Contracts had been extended. Dominic Thorne was set to return. The writer's room opened in March. Production was scheduled for late fall. And then Robert Downey Jr. gave the interview. It was a routine press stop, a podcast, promotion for a drama film. Not even superhero related. He was asked a softball, how he felt about his character's legacy in the MCU. Downey smiled, spoke warmly, spoke slowly, then paused, and said something no one at Disney was ready for. They asked what I think of these kids wearing the suit now. And listen, I'm flattered. I really am. But it's weird, you know? Because Tony wasn't a costume. He was a man. Flawed, broken, selfish. He earned that armor. I don't know if that's what we're seeing anymore. It wasn't a rant. It wasn't even hostile. But it hit like a slap. Within 24 hours, the clip had gone viral. Headlines twisted it into judgment. Downey slams Disney's Ironheart. Downey Jr. Questions Marvel's new Iron Heroes. Comment sections lit up. So did fan channels, TikTokers, reaction streamers. Everyone had the same instinct. Tony Stark wouldn't have approved of this, and at first Disney tried to ignore it. Let the storm pass, but it didn't. It built. The backlash came in waves, first from fans, then from critics, then from inside the company. Because Downey's quote didn't land in a vacuum. It landed on top of something unstable, something waiting to crack. For months, Disney had been operating under the assumption that Ironheart would be their next safe bet. Not a global blockbuster, but steady, culturally important, symbolic. They'd promoted it in ESG presentations, highlighted it in diversity slideshows for shareholders. But the numbers told a different story. Ironheart Season 1 had one of the lowest completion rates of any Marvel Disney Plus series. Viewer drop-off after Episode 2 was sharp. Internal data leaked to The Verge showed that fewer than 31% of viewers who started the series finished it within 30 days. Toy sales were negligible. Tie-in comics underperformed. Still, the company pressed on, because the optics were worth more than the outcome. Or so they believed. After the Downey clip went viral, something shifted. Not externally. Internally. People in the building started whispering. Not just about the quote, but about what they'd been trying not to say out loud. That Ironheart wasn't working, that it wasn't connecting, that maybe it wasn't just the backlash they feared. Maybe it was the silence. A leaked email from a Marvel development executive, posted anonymously to Reddit and later verified by IGN, said it plainly. We can't afford another Echo situation. Echo had been another casualty, under-promoted, underseen, buried in the algorithm and left to rot. Now executives were looking at Ironheart and seeing the same pattern. And suddenly, Downey's quote wasn't a rogue opinion. It was a permission slip. Because when the man who built the franchise questions the future of the suit, what room does that leave for the ones who inherit it? On August 2nd, a confidential meeting was held at Disney's streaming division. No cameras, no Zoom. Just in person, senior only. Among the attendees, Dana Walden, Kevin Feige, Alan Bergman, and a lawyer from corporate IP protection. The agenda, review Ironheart Season 2's development status. It lasted 47 minutes. At the end of that meeting, Season 2 was canceled. Not delayed, not restructured, canceled. Effective immediately. Writers were released from contract, production schedules were frozen, soundstage reservations were dropped, calls were made, emails went out, not to the press, but to merchandising partners, comic writers, license holders. The directive was blunt: wind it down. Publicly, nothing was said, not yet. But inside the machine, the story moved fast. Writers were told to halt all ongoing work. One assistant, anonymously quoted by The Wrap, said the directive came mid-sentence. They were reviewing a scene breakdown. Then someone entered the room, whispered something to the showrunner, and 10 minutes later, the room was shut. No final draft, no last call. Just a locked door and a text, "We're done." Dominique Thorne was notified by her agent. No call from Marvel, no message from Feige. Just a forwarded PDF containing formal notice of contract release. Her camp reportedly reached out for clarification. Was this temporary? Would she still appear in other titles? The response was vague, ambiguous. Carefully worded to imply possibility, but not promise. In the absence of truth, speculation filled the void. A story began to take shape online. Downey had intervened. Downey had pressured the studio. Downey had demanded the show be pulled. None of it was true, but none of it mattered, because the public believed it. And inside Disney, executives saw an opportunity to let the backlash carry the blame, a scapegoat they didn't have to manufacture. Downey had handed them an exit, and they took it. But it wasn't just about saving face. It was about avoiding risk. Internal metrics showed a troubling trend. Every post about Ironheart, whether promotional, neutral, or unrelated, was now drowning in, quote, tweets filled with Tony Stark gifs and demands for respect. Some mocked, some attacked. But the overwhelming vibe was exhaustion. Audiences weren't rejecting Thorne. They were rejecting the franchise's insistence that legacy didn't matter, that anyone could wear the armor and fans would cheer the same way. That illusion had cracked, loudly. And now, inside Disney's streaming division, the question was no longer, can we fix this bust, but how do we quietly move on? There was no announcement, no press release, no investor note, no statement to the trades. The cancellation of Ironheart Season 2 didn't come with fanfare. It came with silence. Controlled. Intentional. It was buried under a wave of new content headlines. Deadpool and Wolverine teaser updates. Casting news for Fantastic Four. Fresh concept art for Blade. Headlines that sucked oxygen out of the room. Headlines that made sure nobody asked the real question. What happens when the new generation fails to carry the old one? Marvel's plan had been clear. The future of the franchise would be built on legacy characters. Young heroes wearing old symbols. Riri as Ironheart, Kate Bishop as Hawkeye, Kamala Khan as Miss Marvel, Cassie Lang as Stature. But now behind closed doors, that foundation was starting to rot. Because the audience wasn't buying in, and worse, they were starting to push back. The internal analytics painted a brutal picture. Marvel's engagement tracking, a proprietary system that scrapes, scores, and quantifies millions of fan interactions across platforms, flagged Ironheart as downward volatile. It was the same label given to the Marvels in Q3 of the previous year. Same engagement trend, same merch resistance, same early fatigue. And after Downey's quote exploded, a new layer emerged: legacy rejection. It wasn't that fans hated new characters, it's that they didn't believe the stories anymore. A new face in the suit wasn't inspiring. It was insulting. Audiences didn't want replacements, they wanted meaning, growth, earned identity, not lineage by IP inheritance. Downey hadn't insulted Thorne. He hadn't even mentioned her. But what he said And what Disney didn't, opened the door to a narrative they couldn't close. Dominique Thorne didn't respond to any of it. She stayed offline. No comments, no interviews, no subtle likes or quiet story reposts. Her team declined all media requests, even from outlets friendly to Marvel. Internally, Marvel hoped she'd stay attached for future appearances. There were plans, small ones, cameos, multiverse B-plots. But one source close to her camp described her silence as final. She's hurt. She built something and they let it burn. Why go back? It wasn't just about the cancellation, it was about what it said. That her character, her story, her work, none of it was worth defending. Not publicly, not privately. Marvel didn't even frame it as a creative reset. They let the online backlash do the talking. They let Downey's unplanned comment erase a full season of storytelling. And they let her become collateral damage for a mistake she didn't make. The writers were equally silent. Some were under NDAs, others didn't care to speak. But a few, off the record, made their feelings known. One writer described the entire experience as a placeholder show, that it had never been given the resources to succeed, that half the scenes had been chopped up to fit budget requirements, that every time they pitched emotionally grounded storylines, the response was the same. Can we punch something instead? Meanwhile, Marvel's leadership, Feige, Alonso's replacement, senior production heads, held a series of emergency roundtables. The focus wasn't just Ironheart, it was the whole Phase 5 roadmap. Were legacy heroes still the future? Were the audience's expectations irreversibly damaged? Was it too late to turn back? The data told them yes. A confidential memo from Marvel's Consumer Research Division, dated August 10th, outlined 5 key insights gathered from post-Ironheart sentiment analysis. Among them, legacy fatigue is real. Audiences want evolution, not replacement. Trust in brand names has declined sharply post-Endgame. Nostalgia outperforms novelty 3-1. Robert Downey Jr. is still the franchise's cultural heartbeat. The last point hit hardest, because the entire premise of Ironheart had been built on the idea that the man didn't matter. Only the suit did. But now the data said otherwise. The man mattered. Too much. And so, one by one, plans were rewritten. The Young Avengers pitch was put on hold. Armor Wars, once a film, then a series, now somewhere in between, was reshuffled again. Rumors swirled internally that Kevin Feige had told his team to go back to root stories and away from what one executive called symbol swapping. And most telling of all, a script rewrite for Avengers. Secret Wars removed a full sequence that had originally included Riri Williams interacting with an alternate universe Tony Stark. The implication was clear: she wasn't just out of her own show, she was out of the myth. And still, Disney said nothing. The first internal meeting about bringing him back wasn't recorded. It wasn't on Zoom. No agenda was circulated. But according to multiple sources inside Marvel's senior strategy group, the question was finally asked, and carefully, and not by Kevin Feige. What if we called Robert? It was taboo even to consider, only a year earlier. Downey's farewell in Endgame had been sacrosanct. The perfect exit. The arc that defined the franchise. He had made it clear, publicly and privately, that his time as Tony Stark was over, that the door was closed. But now the rules were shifting. Downey's offhand comments about Ironheart had become something else entirely. Not a hit piece, not a demand, but a line in the sand. And when Marvel failed to defend its future, the audience turned toward its past. Not just out of nostalgia, but out of need. For consistency. For gravity. For someone to believe in again. And whether Marvel liked it or not, that someone still wore the name Tony Stark. The numbers were impossible to ignore. Internal testing of Ironheart post-cancellation showed a spike in engagement around scenes that referenced Stark, even indirectly. YouTube breakdowns of his role in Civil War, Infinity War, and Endgame began trending again. Merch sales for Iron Man branded figures saw a 14% bump in Q3. A Stark Industries hoodie, originally released in 2019, suddenly sold out in 3 different online stores. Something was shifting. The character hadn't lost relevance. The brand had just lost direction. So in early September, Feige made a move. Quietly, with no fanfare, a conversation was initiated through Downey's representation. Not about a full return, not yet, but about possibilities, limited appearances, a multiverse variation, an AI echo, a story thread for Secret Wars. Nothing permanent, just enough to recalibrate the audience, to remind them what the heart of the story used to feel like. According to someone with knowledge of the conversation, Downey didn't say yes, but he didn't say no either. He said it would depend on the story. That word story meant everything, because Ironheart had never been about story. It had been about brand continuation, about checking boxes, about filling the vacuum left behind by a man who was never actually replaceable. And now Marvel knew it. Inside the company, a new directive began circulating. It wasn't written, it wasn't framed as a strategy shift, but everyone felt it. The era of identity swapping was over. The audience had drawn the line, and the studio had no choice but to adapt, not through announcements, not through flash, but through quiet reversal. The signs were subtle. A delay in the Young Avengers production slate. A reworking of Kate Bishop's appearance in Daredevil Born Again. A pause on Kamala Khan's standalone series. The phrase, earned legacy, began appearing in internal pitch notes. Even newer properties were reapproached with skepticism. Who's the heart of this story? Not the name, the person. That question had once defined Marvel. It had built Downey's Tony Stark. It had made Steve Rogers matter. It had launched a universe. But somewhere along the way, the studio forgot that legacy isn't inherited. It's earned. And symbols on their own aren't characters like Jor. They're just packaging. As for Ironheart, what remains is uncertain. The show is still up on Disney+, for now. Dominique Thorne remains technically available, but insiders don't expect her to return. The costume has been shelved. Merch runs halted. Tie-in comics quietly folded. There are no plans for a revival, not in this phase, maybe not ever. And yet, in an odd way, the show did serve a purpose. It drew the line. It reminded Marvel of what its audience actually wants. Not a rotating door of brands, but people they can care about, people they believe in, people who matter, not just because they wear the suit, but because they earned the right to. So when the call to Downey was made, it wasn't just about a cameo. It was about trying to fix something deeper, to reach back into the foundation and ask a question no studio wants to admit out loud. What if we lost what made this whole thing work? And maybe, just maybe, the only way forward is to go back to the beginning.